Live from Los Angeles, this is Dr. Erin, Dr. Divinity. We come together each day to know the truth, live on spiritual principle, and align with universal law. We also come together as a community and truly know that everyone has a gift and message to bring to the world when they awaken. And we are so excited. I'm so excited to have today's guest on, Sebastian Siegel. He is a British-American filmmaker. You've seen him probably on so many incredible shows. He's one of the most enlightened people and friends I have in Los Angeles. He is a meditation teacher, also integral practitioner. But today we're going to break on down what it means to love. I know that so many of us have dealt with codependency and trying to struggle between where is true love versus dysfunctional love. And we're going to break it on down through his incredible film, Grace and Grit, that is based on Ken Wilber's incredible book. And so I want to just start with a quote from Alex Gray. Like the Tree of Life or The Fountain, Grace and Grit is a movie that takes you on a spiritual journey into the depths of love and then beyond. Sebastian Siegel is a dexterous and original director. His movie is transcendent storytelling at its best. Alex Gray, which is an icon. So how are you, Sebastian? So good to see you.
Excellent. It's so great to be here. Thanks so much.
So let's break this down. I want to first, I'm sure majority of people know who Ken Wilber. He's an icon. He's one of the most famous philosophers in the world. But what was it about his work in particular that had you be so inspired to take on making a film?
You know, as a storyteller, I think since I was a kid, my father was a professor of Indian religions. And so I grew up influenced largely by these comics, these sort of Hindu comics of Ganesha and Rama and Krishna and Vishnu, etc. And I think one of the things that retrospectively interested me about those comics was how all of these gods were avatars of one another, that one would have the head of another and would become the other, etc. And I think just that kind of myth early on had me probably thinking subconsciously about what's really going on in life. And then, how we are sort of these aspects of one another, right? And then I think later, when I fell in love with psychology and philosophy and spirituality, then, even reading Martin Buber's work and having this sort of I-thou relationship with the other, seeing the light of God or spirituality or self always in the other, that this, what intimacy is when we go from non-duality into duality. In other words, when we leave sort of non-existence and come into this physical world, right? What feels so good about intimacy, whether it's looking in the eyes of our dog or our friend or our family or our lover, is to see the eye contact in the other and feel that presence in the other, this spectacular spirituality, right? This spectacular sense of God or oneness or ultimate self. So I think that when I fell in love with Ken's work and reading all of his books, that he was the most dexterous and radical writer about kind of the psychology of God, if you will, right? And he wrote this book, A Brief History of Everything. So like Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, where he describes from the Big Bang to now the evolution of the physical universe.
And nothing's so brief about those books, by the way.
What's that?
those books are not brief at all. They're big reads.
And I think Wilber writes extrapolates on the evolution of consciousness and sort of the what is that? What is evolving consciousness, and how do we locate it? How are we aware of it? How do we contribute to it? Where are we in it? What is it? And so I think that when I read this book, this particular book, most of his books are on consciousness. This is a true love story. It's this epic, sweeping love story. And I think it grounded a lot of those themes in this relationship between Ken and the love of his life. So good. When I read it, I put the line down, and I was, whoa, and I cried, and I was taken by the book, right? Grace and Grit. But then also something resonated with me where I felt that this book was saying something and pointing at ultimately passionate and romantic, but also selfless and ultimately transcendent love. That love lives on, right? And that was what captivated me about it. And so I said, this would just make an amazing movie. And many producers came before me and actors came before me to try to make this into a movie. But a movie is like a baby, right? It requires, just the right fertile ground for conception, and then the right parenting, and the right, all these sort of things to kind of bring it into the world. So I didn't really choose it. It chose me, I think.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I think that's kind of like love. It's like our careers, our calling, it chooses us for sure. Ken Wilber, I learned about him. My father was obsessed with him years ago, and he's just this profound teacher. I think he's written, 25 books and done in so many different languages. And his work is really amazing because it really measures consciousness. And I think that that's, as we know, is that we experience our oneness to the extent to which we expand our consciousness. And to be able to measure that, I think is so important for people to recognize and be able to see the cause and effect of their life in accordance to their consciousness. And so let's break this on down, because I think that so many of us, including myself, I was codependent for years, and I would see that love in the eyes of whoever I was with, but I'd make them the source of my joy, which instantaneously made them the source of my suffering. And I would put my, heart and soul into relationships that were not the best, you know what I mean? They weren't in consciousness. They weren't working towards a higher, healing and evolving and everything else, which obviously Ken Wilber would be in any relationship, he would be in that. But so let's break on down what it is about this story. Is obviously we don't want to give the audience everything, but what can people expect to learn in their own reflection of what it is that they need to do, maybe even like the principles of what it is that they would be doing to have a highly conscious relationship?
That's a beautiful question. First of all, there's bad news is there's no explosions and there's no car chases. Okay. I feel that there are so many incredible books and paintings and love songs and movies and sculptures that articulate questions, existential questions that we ask ourselves about what is love, what is the purpose of life, etc. There's so many artworks that we've created throughout history to try to articulate things that are largely ineffable, like these questions. What is love? How do we find it? How do we touch that deepest part of ourselves? And I feel that the job of the storyteller in that way, whether it is the architect or the person who makes a beautiful garden, or an author, or storytelling in any capacity, is to touch something deep inside that is conscious in one way, but then in another way is deeply experiential, right? And so I think about it when for instance, I think we can all relate to hearing a Marvin Gaye song as a kid and hearing the beat and thinking, wow, man, that guy's got such this rhythmic, beautiful voice, and I love that song. And you're like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And then all of a sudden, you're 15 or 20, and the song takes on a whole different meaning, right? The first time your heart's broken, the first time that you feel some sort of pain in the world. And then you hear that song, and it's still the great beat, and it's still the beautiful voice. But all of a sudden, it brings you to tears, right? And so I think that for me with this film particularly, I wanted to do something, and film being unique in a way that it's so immersive, right? You can sit for 2 hours in the theater at home and watch a movie, and you have this completely immersive experience if we're available to it, right? And so I wanted to create something totally experiential, so that at the beginning of the film, an audience or a couple or etc. will sit and fall in love and be excited and feel that anticipation of what it is, to have that allow that into our lives, and then to be wounded by it and to be afraid to lose it. And then to find some sort of reconciliation to say, okay, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to put myself aside. And then ultimately to be totally crucified and to say, okay, in the end, it's going to take me and it's going to pierce me and it's going to penetrate me. But ultimately, that's the only way to really find that deep well and capacity for love within us.
I love
so
that.
With this film, I want to take the audience along all of those things, so that it's less up here, but it's more really in here, so that by the end, hopefully people are crying and laughing some, but that it resonates for days or weeks or years after, like the book has for so many people, where people say, wow, this really, I was able to, through this 2-hour experience, embody all these terrains and sort of touch all these different terrains of profound love.
I love that so much. And it reminds me of, you know, we refer to all the different philosophies and different religions, but I love some of the East religions that refer to the different types of reverence and taking on a spiritual practice. And for me, it's really, and my ministry, it's really, you know, a revered divine. But I look at some of my friends that revere their relationships, and it's really their highest, you know, it is their daily spiritual practice, is to really surrender and be of service and really look at that as a place to grow exponentially. And I think it's way more advanced than being a minister. I really do. I feel like in relationship is the most intense reflection of what's going on at a soul level. And I'm so excited for you to take the audience on the journey of having your heart crack open and be able to touch on heaven and hell at the same time, which is really all of life. And to experience life is that, it's the dynamic of all of it. And I think so many times we want in a relationship for it to only be the good, but there's also some really hard times. There can be very challenging times in relationship. So what's your take on what is your take when you read that first? I just have this visual because I actually saw you talking about how you were in Hawaii. Is that correct? When you read the book for the first time? And I just have this image of you opening the book, and we've all read a book where, you know, you turn the pages and your life completely changes. What was that like for you?
You know, first, you said something really beautiful, many things there, but one particular thing where you were saying that you had many people that you work with, you know, who hold their relationship as their highest kind of spiritual practice. Yeah. And I think that's pertinent to this book and this story also. And I think it's becoming more and more, even more and more common, that even if we have a spiritual religious practice, a meditative practice, a yogic practice, that if we're not bringing that to the relationship then we're in, then what are we doing here, right? Because the world by nature is communicative, it's interactive. Yeah, intimacy is the ultimate, whether it's even just, you know, enjoying opening up a coconut or climbing a tree and smelling the air and feeling the salt in the ocean, you know, or really feeling the kiss or the gaze or the hug or the sweet sound of our pet, or whatever that thing is, you know, the sweet sound of the air. And I think that that's a profound, deeply important practice. So I appreciate that. And it's refreshing also to hear that that's common, and that you see that a lot.
So common. And I think that, look, we have to just say about the story for a minute, which is really where, you know, Ken meets his partner and they fall madly in love, and they get married, like 3 months after they meet, and she ends up getting diagnosed, you know, with cancer. And I often think, just like you said, you have to surrender to it. It's like it's almost chooses you, our passions in life. I feel like there's something in our culture that still says that if we haven't found that deep, deep love like that, there must be something wrong with us. And for Ken and his partner to meet and have that much of a connection, you know, I don't think that all of us we may not be struck by lightning like that over the course of our lifetime. We may not be as fortunate to have that calling in this lifetime, or maybe we're fortunate to not have that calling in this lifetime. But what's your take on, you know, like, do you feel like that's something so special when people experience that? How have you dealt with, you know, what's your take and view on kind of the traditional way that our culture views that something might be wrong with you if you are not in a marriage or in something that is, you know, a commitment at that level? What do you say about
that? That's beautifully expressed. I think that love is this type of labyrinth that is so brilliant and wise on the edges of expansive consciousness that we cannot anticipate it even, right? That we are just an aspect of it, that we are in that stream. In other words, that love's not in us, but that we're just a chord in the stream, that it's always there. Right. And I think that faith, trust is like wanting something to go a certain way, you know, saying, I believe this is going to go this way, you know, or hope is saying, well, I hope it'll go this way. And there's a sort of karmic sense to hope. But faith is really saying, I'm going to give myself up to the water. And if I float, I float. And if I sink, I sink. But either way, it's okay. And then the paradox is that often when we do give ourselves up, we float. We can't do it in order to float. So I think love has this brilliant articulation that is so spectacular, and yet it culminates again and again and again in this juxtaposition between sweet and salt, between honey and salt, between bitterness and things that are that we desire right off. Right? So I think that, in other words, i.e. to ground that, love makes us do all these things that we wouldn't otherwise do. We say, oh my God, I care for this person. Well, I'm going to take this risk and go out and I'm going to trust this person. I'm going to marry this person. I'm going to have a child with this person. I'm going to, and even if it's not romantic love, just I'm going to be there for this person at the expense of what I think is important to me. Mm-hmm. Then love, through that process, helps us uncover what we really find to be important. All the things I thought were important were actually not, because love manipulated me, and guided me down. And I use that word in jest, in other words, love fooled me in a way to awaken me. Yeah, and I think of love as this radical koan in that way, to use a sort of Eastern term, this joke by which there is no answer, that in the finding of that answer, we're awakened. And I think love does that, right? It's like, when we expect it. And I think, as beautiful as it is to meet people virtually online now, there's so much planning that goes into that, and it can be incredible with the fit. The people can say, I have these similarities, and that brings people together, and you see a lot of success stories. But I think a lot of the things there, though, that often don't work is that the similarities are what bring people together, but it's the differences that allow the spectacular aspects of growth and love to work. In other words, it's the difference between two individuals that is the value in the relationship, because that's the opportunity for growth. And if the glue of the similarities is strong enough, we say, okay, we're going to overcome these differences. And then once we do, we find out that, I wasn't actually overcoming the differences. I was overcoming myself into this sort of deeper, more spectacular being. And then I also have located this deeper, more intimate aspect of love in this process. Yeah.
It's so true. And I'm sure people might look at a love story like this and think, oh, why can't I find that or whatever? And I totally agree with you. I believe that even in what I would consider maybe one of my worst relationships is very dysfunctional, but it was exactly what I needed. It was exactly what I needed to wake up and no longer, not love myself enough to put myself in bad situations. And so I totally believe that love it just does this thing, exactly what it's supposed to do. Love's gonna, have you grow in ways that you could never grow on your own. It's really a beautiful thing.
And, and I want to, on that, I want to, hit also, I think, an important point of, with this original sort of exploration of this question about somebody feeling, oh, well, I'm not ready, or I'm not right, or I don't deserve it, or what is that thing? That love is so powerful and profound. And it has so many different aspects, even before selfless or transcendent or romantic or even friendship love. It's already operating in dynamic ways. And I think it's trusting that ways that lead to deeper ways. In other words, i.e., just to put out a sort of, wild example would be to say, well, listen, if I really give myself up to, I'm a gardener, and I really give myself up to planting beautiful flowers, that love is in action there. And then we find ourselves in the garden planting these beautiful flowers, and there's this beautiful plumeria, and it smells so sweet, and it's spectacular. And then it's through that the right person walks by at a moment and says, that flower is amazing.
I love that.
Ding. Right?
So I just have to say, I want to bring it to you for a minute, okay? Because Marianne Williamson says, Grace and Grit is an epic love story. Sebastian's adaptation of this powerful book stays true to the source. This movie is a testament to the transformative powers of what love can do. But what I really hear in that is people need to know, you're somebody who is an extraordinary human being. I mean, we've met for years online. We have very, common different groups. I came over one day with Vinesh in Mind Valley to a group of probably about 30 people, a very intimate, highly, highly conscious group of people. You're around so many extraordinary people. And I'm imagining people looking and go, who is he? And what does he exactly do? And I think that kind of a question I could see the audience maybe wanting is how do you get to be like him? What does it take to become somebody who's clearly a master of the craft, clearly, you know, is learned how to embody. Obviously your physicality is very, you know, you can tell you work out a lot and stuff. And then your language and your education and your ability to actually try and make a difference in the world. You know what I mean? Like, so here's this, what I would consider an extraordinary human being. What would you say to somebody out there that's watching this that says, how do I do that? You know what I mean? Like, what would you kind of say is some of the secrets you've embodied?
I'm Batman. That was so kind. Thank you for that. And I think, you know, anyone who is, I think when we look around, right, and we see things in the world, we're looking at and things that we find beautiful or that we're attracted to. I think that what we're ultimately looking at on any level, whether it's micro or macro, is patterns. Yeah, that we see a flower and the way that it opens up. You know, there's this continuity of pattern, of commitment to unfolding. And no matter how many flowers we've looked at, you know, sometimes we can just look at it and say that's beautiful. And other times we're like, oh my God, the whole universe is right there, right? And if we look up in the sky, no matter how many clouds we've seen, we can still be caught on one particular day, at one particular moment, at just the right time to say, God, that cloud is spectacular, right? Or the eye contact with a stranger or an animal or something like this, you know? And I think that it's the same way when we look in history at individuals who are painting things or drawing things or saying things, articulating things in different ways, where we say, there's this pattern, and that pattern is so beautiful. And I think about resonance being sort of the most fundamental form of consciousness. Like even if you take a glass and rub the edge of it or knock something and there's a certain resonance, right? But that's consciousness at its base, elementary, rudimentary form. And I think that when we are seduced by things, and I think when I've been seduced by things, the requisite has seemed to be, for the things that I've been drawn to, particularly speakers or authors or poets, is there's been just a commitment to the craft. Just like the flower has the commitment to the unfolding, there's been, you know, Martin Luther King is hugely influential for me as a writer and as a speaker, and I have the papers of his unpublished papers. And, you know, I will read just random moments in those things, and he's brilliant. What he's saying is about one thing, but it's really about so many things, you know, and so many poets and writers. And so I think as a kid early on and looking at pictures even and hearing speakers speak, I thought, wow, I want to get lost in that. What is it to communicate? What is it to reach always inside and go further and further and further and reach out and try to touch further and further and further. And I think that just became, for me, the mission of my life in every single way. And in short,
I just so relate, you know, I'm like, I don't understand if you're not obsessed with consciousness. I'm like, that's cool. I just don't understand. Like, I think it's just, we're very much, you know, kindred spirits that way for sure. And I'm like, oh, he is this beautiful, you know, your language is so beautiful and your way of expressing it is so embodied in everything you do. So tell people where they can find you. You've obviously right now we are on lockdown. We're coming out of it right now. And people will be watching this, I'm sure, for a long time, but where can people find you to be able to, you know, engage with you? Because I know you have different events around Los Angeles and you have books and obviously you have movies, you have shows. Tell people how they can get more of you.
I'm pretty reclusive.
Join the club.
You know, I don't do a lot of social media, but Instagram's great as a messenger service, right? So Sebastian Siegel 1. And then if I'm doing something, an event or something like that, or a screening or a think tank or something, sometimes I'll share that there. I have a book, it's called The Consciousness Revolution. It'll be out later this year in English. It's in German right now. And I'm doing a different rendition for the US audience. And then also, obviously, Grace and Grit has not committed to a world premiere yet, but it's been accepted to a lot of top festivals and already won pre-selected for some awards at some of these festivals. And most of them are navigating in limbo to try to figure out when they're going to have their theatrical opening. So it will be at one, I think, at the Chinese Theater in Los Angeles towards the end of the year, and then in other spots in the world, depending on how theaters allow that to happen. So that's also at that website for the film, graceandgrit.net.
I love it. Well, you are a total inspiration. You just are an artist. You're a true artist. I remember when I came to your home at that gathering, you did read, I believe it was an excerpt from your book. And it was so beautiful that I couldn't help but get tears in my eyes as I looked around the room at all these beautiful human beings and thinking about all their work of just diving into their expertise of consciousness, all of them. And your ability to gather around these amazing community. And I just thought, this is what it's all about. And a side effect of the blessing of all this work of consciousness is to have people like you in my life and be surrounded by such extraordinary minds. And so I'm excited to watch you. I mean, I can't even imagine what's gonna watching you over your lifetime, everything. Or you've already, you're already reaching places that people would never even think they could possible, So thank you so much for all of your work. It's really beautiful. And just again, tell people where they can find you, the website for the movie, and where they can find you again across social media.
You're so wonderful. That's so kind. I'll take it. Yeah, the evening you were talking about with Mind Valley, Vishen, we hosted a little event here. And I like to do think tank salons. It's funny, that came to be because when I first came to Los Angeles, I went to, I found that I didn't like sort of bars and clubs, and that there was, there were a lot of amazing museums and art shows and things like that, but I also wanted to be involved in things that were more intimate. And I went originally to Norman and Lynn Lear's house, and they were doing speakers, and I thought, this is amazing that they're learning from all these exceptional individuals that they're having to their home. And so I started doing that at my home with piano concerts and think tanks and political speakers, conservative and liberal, presidential speakers, etc., movie screenings, etc. My home. This is great. I only have to put on my shoes.
Yeah, right.
So,
in fact, we all took off our shoes.
That's right. Yeah, 100%. Has to be. Yeah.
So just tell people one more time where they can find you and follow you.
Instagram's great. That's a great messenger service for me. Just Sebastian Siegel with the digit 1. And then the teaser for the film is at Grace and Grit, graceandgrit.net. You can just search it, Grace and Grit movie.
Amazing. Thank you so much and have a beautiful day. If you guys are just tuning in, please follow, like, share, comment. It's super important. Go check out the trailer, or if the movie's out in theaters, I just know it's going to be one of those that's going to rock people to the core. Getting back to the core principle of what true love is, which is always for the highest good, which is always for the evolution, which is always for the consciousness, expanding into our oneness and greatness. And so, follow Sebastian. He's an extraordinary human being, and everywhere around him, everyone that touches his life, his friends, his family, everyone is extraordinary as well. It's super important. If you want to have a great life, you need to surround yourself with extraordinary people. So you want to really follow people that bring your life to a higher consciousness. You can delete the other people and get on with your life, because this is what I know for sure is it's important for you to live your truth. Have a beautiful day, and may you live your truth.